So I'm Joe. I first wanted to display my beautiful tumbler.
The most magnificent
it is.
beverage vessel of all time.
I can vouch for that. My question is, where do you see the future of like true constitutional conservatism in our government? So when I look at like the Senate, for example, I see people like Mike Lee and Ted Cruz who are really dedicated to the principles of the founding and the principles that you sort of laid out in your speech. But then also on the Republican side, there are people like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski who kind of are a little more wishy-washy on that sort of thing. So where do you see the future of like a true constitutional conservative like Republican Party? Is that even possible?
I do think it's possible. I think it's going to require a change in the electorate. I think that what Trump showed more than anything else is not that there's this nationalist populist upswing, because I don't think that's right. I think that Trump basically won because he did fight, and also because Hillary was the worst candidate in the history of American politics. So so the idea that there's sort of an anti-conservative upsurge that Trump is responsible for, I don't think is right. I think exactly the same people who were Tea Party voters in 2010 voted for President Trump in 2016. Like exactly the same people. So what that says is that if you have a strong leader at the head of government, you know, a Mike Lee or a Ted Cruz, somebody who actually is advocating constitutional principles, you'll see a lot of people swing behind that in the same way they swung behind Trump, because that's the most convenient ship for fighting the left. So Trump was the most convenient ship for fighting the left, so they followed that ship. The most convenient ship for fighting the left should be a constitutional conservatism, and then you can fight the left with that. That said, as far as legislation, I mean, the first thing that has to be done is if I were Mitch McConnell, and didn't look like a turtle, then I would only propose bills that are about 4 pages long and that have tremendous support. These omnibus packages are a disaster area. McConnell's goal should not be, I need to pass something. McConnell's goal should be, I need to get people on record for or against particular issues. And I think that's how the House should run, too. I mean, this is not how the founders intended any of this. They didn't intend 1,000-page health care bills. It seems to me that you should be able to pass a 4-page bill that gets rid of the medical device tax, you know, and do that with wide support. And if Democrats decide to oppose it, then they decide to oppose it, and then you campaign against that. That's good politics.
Just one follow-up real fast. Where do you see the tax bill going?
Well, I mean, it depends. The House tax bill is better than the Senate tax bill. The Senate tax bill that they've released raises some individual rates. It's all being done through reconciliation, which makes it very difficult for there to be an actual tax cut. Right? They're even talking about phasing out the corporate tax cuts sunsetting those in a few years. I think it's going to have a rough ride. I think it's going to be difficult for them to pass anything, just because you have 52 Republicans, and that includes Collins, Murkowski, McCain. You know, that's a fractious caucus. So I think they're going to have some. I think they will pass something. I don't know that the thing they're going to pass is going to be particularly fantastic, and I certainly don't think that passing a tax bill means you win in 2018. First of all, I'm bewildered as to this idea that the Trump base is clamoring for a tax bill. Like, that was not something that Trump spent a lot of time on the campaign trail. We're now a year in. Where's the wall? Right? I mean, this is what the Trump base cares about, is the wall. They don't care about the tax rates for corporations. It's a complete misread of the political dynamic, I think.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hi, Ben. My name is Jacob. I'm from the University of Michigan. First off, I just want to tell you my family and I loved your tweet about Chad Gaya.
Oh, thank you.
Great.
The only two people in the room who get that joke.
Yep, exactly. My question for you is, I was debating my professor the other day about socialized healthcare, and he was giving me this very emotional argument about this kid, and I mean, it's one of those situations you describe where they have everything, like they're transgender, everything is going on, and
right, one leg, cancer,
exactly,
tuberculosis,
exactly. Yeah. And Hillary lost the day before. Okay, so anyways. Right. So I'm telling him, who's going to be providing the service? There's a doctor who has to be doing this. They go through medical school, and it's kind of like when Rand Paul says you're enslaving this doctor. So where do you like to take a position on this, and how do you make an argument to a person who's trying to tell you on the basis of very emotional arguments that socialized healthcare needs to be instituted in the country?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to say, listen, I think it's nasty of you to suggest that I don't want this one-legged, cancer-ridden, tuberculosis-having child not to have health care. Of course I want that child to have health care. The question that we are now discussing is not should that child have health care, it's what is the best way to assure that that child has health care. And the idea that socialized medicine is the best way to ensure that a child with terrible, terrible conditions has unlimited health care, that's just not true. rationing of health care is a necessity as soon as you suggest that the government is going to be in centralized control of the system. Now, if you want to discuss, various healthcare systems and which work the best among the quote-unquote nationalized healthcare systems, probably the best one is Switzerland. Switzerland basically mandates it. They have a mandatory system where you have to spend up to 8%, I believe, of your income on healthcare, and then the government will cover the rest. And you also can purchase supplementary insurance, I believe. But that's not something that people in the United States are willing to do. No one wants to pay 8% no one wants to be mandated to pay 8% of their income on healthcare every year. It also neglects the fact that as you say, the big problem here is medical supply, right? The supply of doctors. We have a tremendous shortage of medical personnel in the United States. You see it most explicitly in places like the UK, where they're actually importing people from India in order to do all the nursing. And that is a direct result of the fact that a non-market-driven system leads to scarcity. I mean, markets lead to greater prosperity and better quality. And nationalization is redistribution of existing resources, which eventually leads to scarcity. So Rand Paul's point is exactly on. My wife is on a 26-hour shift right now. She works at Kaiser, and she's on a 26-hour shift right now. Being a doctor means you have to go through an inordinate amount of hell in order to become a doctor. That's hard enough. But to suggest then that the government is going to pay you like a postal worker afterward, or that you are obligated to provide care at any level you don't see fit, is a violation of somebody's rights. And more than that, on an efficiency level, it's not going to drive people to become doctors. Who becomes a doctor in order so that they can make $60,000 a year and be worked like a dog? No one does that. The only reason my wife goes through this crap in residency is because she's going to get paid 3 times as much when she's out. That's true for every single person who goes into residency.
Thank you so much.
So first, big fan. But I do have to say, my question would actually be, there's this professor at NYU, his name's Scott Galloway. He published a book called The Four, and he's kind of proposing that they're kind of like these big monopolies that are rising out of like Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Apple. It's a really interesting book, but I was actually wondering, because I've had this brought up to me a couple times, what's kind of the conservative way to talk about monopolies when you're debating someone?
So my belief is that there's 2 ways that people have typically approached monopoly. There's monopoly from the business side, and there's monopoly from the consumer side. Typically, American antitrust law has focused on monopoly from the consumer side. Is it hurting the consumer? Right? The left likes to focus on monopoly from the business side, as in, does someone have 100% control of the market? The reason that's stupid is because sometimes they're monopolies that are generating an enormous amount of wealth and also really cheap product. Like the way that they are staying monopolies is by outcompeting their competitors. Right? The case in point here would be Microsoft, which didn't control 100% of the market in the late 90s, but they're broken up by the federal government even though they were charging the cheapest prices for their software, and then the prices rose and actually the technology got worse. So I think that the key component here should be what is good for consumers, not you just have a generalized anxiety about one person being in control of a marketplace. There are dangers, obviously, to Facebook and Google having complete control over our ability to see information. Right? Facebook particularly, we work with Facebook a lot. And there's always the feeling like they could change the algorithm at any point and start punishing particular outlets. And that's been, I think, a credible fear. But I've never thought, as a conservative, the solution to that was to treat it as a public utility and have the government come in and regulate it, because that just gives the government the ability to tell Facebook what exactly it should do and what it shouldn't do. Instead, I think the better thing to do would be to build alternatives, build other ways of doing things. Antitrust law, I think, is widely overapplied, and the idea of monopoly capitalism is the ruler of all. It's just not true. The number of Fortune 500 companies that are on the Fortune 500 list in like 1970 and are on the list today is like, I think it's 30, 40. There's tremendous turnover in the number of major companies. Like companies that were dominating the market in 1995 don't even exist now. So the idea that we're living in the era of monopoly capitalism, no, it's just that when you create a new product, you tend to have a monopoly at the beginning, and then people catch up.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sam Vankovich from Trinity Western University in Vancouver, BC. And I was wondering what the best way from preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons is, and should the U.S. military and Trump intervene or stay with the agreement we have right now?
So I think the JCPOA, which is the Iran agreement, is a disaster. We should have pulled out of it. Trump did better than Obama, obviously, but he sort of split the baby. He said, we're going to say that they're not abiding by the agreement, but we're not going to pull out of the agreement four square. He should have just pulled out of the agreement, said this is a bad agreement, we're done. With that said, sanctions aren't going to deter Iran. The biggest missed opportunity of my adult lifetime was in 2009 during the revolution in Iran, when Obama took the other side and allowed people to get shot in the streets. so that Iran could become a regional power. Right now, we are looking at the beginnings of an open Sunni-Shia war in the Middle East. I mean, that's what's happening in real time, right? Saudi Arabia has made significant moves in the last week that make this war significantly more likely, right? The new regime has just consolidated power. They've purged all their opposition. They brought the prime minister of Lebanon to Saudi Arabia. He's resigned. He's said that the country is now in the control of Iran. They've declared that the Houthis in Yemen are firing Iranian-made missiles into Saudi Arabia. There's basically two coalitions in the Middle East right now. There's Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, Israel, and then there's the Iranian coalition, which is Syria, Iran, Yemen. Qatar is sort of on their side. Even though they're Sunni. And so it's, the possibility of an open war in the region is quite high right now. And if that does happen, I think the United States will be drawn into it just because we have too many allies in the region not to be drawn into it. If Iran were to take over Saudi Arabia or make significant moves into Jordan, it would be a disaster. It would be a disaster. So, the best thing that it's easy to. I don't think there are any good solutions, and I wish that I could say I thought there were some good solutions that we could just blockade Iran's oil supply and that would finish them. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that perhaps you'd have. The only people who would know this are in military intelligence. I don't know whether the Israelis and the Saudis would have the joint capacity to knock out Iran's nuclear facilities. If that's still a possibility, we should obviously forward that in any way we possibly can, so that we don't have to get involved. Let the Israelis and Saudis take care of it.
Thank you.
Hi, Ben. This is a little bit off topic, but it's very important. My name is Cameron Lilly. I'm a student at the University of Central Florida, and recently UCF suspended me for making a joke about illegal immigration on Facebook. It was an April Fool's joke, and they are now also currently pushing for my expulsion. On top of that, a radical feminist on Twitter doxed me and instructed her 80,000-plus followers to attack me and, quote, destroy my life. And believe me, they have. Almost instantly, I received hundreds of death threats, which I'm still receiving today, and even after deleting all forms of social media, and the attacks have continued since April 1st. I was illegally evicted from my apartment and wasn't able to safely attend classes for weeks. As a result, my GPA dropped sharply, making transferring out almost impossible. On top of that, UCF had me arrested, framing me with cybercrime and eavesdropping. Not even kidding. I'm now over $15,000 in debt from lawyers, and I may never be able to go to college again. It's the first time I've been in debt my entire life. I'm proud of that. I also lost almost all my friends who don't want to be at risk for being attacked or suspended from the school. My questions are, what would you recommend for me to do to handle my current situation and other people in this situation? Because believe me, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
And how do we as conservative-leaning college students continue to enjoy the use of free speech, which, even though it is our right, we still risk, having our lives literally destroyed and attacked, even though it is our right to, speak freely?
Yes, I mean, first of all, it's hard for me to speak to the situation because, while I believe everything that you're saying, I don't know what the original content of the post was. I don't know, what the college's policies are and what the legal stance is. So from putting on my lawyer hat, I don't know what the legal fight here is.
Just so you know, it didn't violate any school policy with the post.
Okay, so, I mean, number one, I think that there are probably a number of places that would help you pay your legal bills and who fight on this, right? Like FIRE is one of those groups. I'm sure that YAF can direct you to people who fight legal fights on behalf of people like you who are being discriminated against by colleges if your account is accurate. So that's where you have to start. I mean, once you've obtained your legal rights, then I think we can start talking about how to reapply to particular colleges, how to get redress from the university. But this seems to me more of a legal problem, on a broader social, in sort of a broader social sphere, because, again, I'm not your lawyer and I don't know your case very well. What I would say is that obviously being doxxed is, as far as I'm aware, a legal issue. So you might have a legal case there. And also, colleges are incredibly overzealous about enforcing anything that they perceive to be violating politically correct standards. But there are ways to fight back in the media. So I would recommend that you send us your information so we can take a look at it. I mean, I do run a website with 100 million page views a month. I would,
That's why I'm here.
I would suggest that. If it's as egregious as you sound, I think that there will be people who come to your defense if you're able to get that material out there. But talk to your lawyers first, because obviously you don't want to jeopardize any legal case that you have. And you should also talk to some of the 501c3 groups that actually spend their lives defending against these kinds of things.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hi, Ben. My name is Christian Parker from Southern Methodist University. And I'd like to ask a position clarification. And in no way, shape, or form am I attacking you. I'm a big fan. I listen to your show
It's
almost
fine if you
every
did.
day.
I don't care, as you know. I mean, not physically, but.
Well, I don't know. I believe it was yesterday on your show when you said you would rather see the passage of good legislation than, or you would rather see no legislation passed than pass bad legislation.
Yes.
And with both the House and Senate tax bills, effectively high-income earners' taxes are being raised with the elimination of the state deduction tax. But then on Monday or Tuesday, I'll keep notes exactly. You said
I'm glad
that,
you're such a devoted listener.
Yes. On Monday or Tuesday, you said you would still support the House bill, even though, quote unquote, you would get shellacked with raising taxes.
Yes. Because I don't actually oppose the policy of removing state deductions for taxes.
Okay.
The reason being, I don't think that the federal government should subsidize California to have high taxes.
Okay.
So I think that what happens now is that if you're in the state of California, then you can have your cake and eat it too. You can vote for high state taxes in the state of California and then vote for high federal taxes knowing you'll never pay them because you can write off the state taxes.
All right.
Right, so I think that it's foolish. I actually don't think it's bad policy, even though, as I say, it'll kill me on taxes this year. But I do think that it is good policy not to have the federal government covering for states like Massachusetts or New York or California with their high state income taxes. Maybe the result of that is that people in California stop being idiots and start voting for lower taxes in the state of California.
Also, may I please get a selfie?
Afterward. Don't worry. Afterward,
Okay.
I'll stick around. We'll all take pictures. It'll be fun.
Hi, I'm Abby Strew. I go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
I remember you. Hello.
Oh, hello. Wow, you remember me. I feel honored. So I guess taking...
Well, Wisconsin was pretty radical, so. Yeah.
Very true. So I guess I'm taking a swing away from the political questions, but you, during your speech, talked about like self-realization and individualism and discovering self-purpose. Well, I'm really Christian, so I definitely believe in God's purpose, like for me. I was wondering if you could elaborate on how you discovered your purpose.
Yes, I mean, in much the same way that you did. As an Orthodox Jew, I think that one of my purposes is to forward a godly agenda, which comes along for me with hundreds of commandments, and so my individual, literally hundreds of them. So my individual purpose is to fulfill what I think God wants of me on this earth, which involves involvement in the community, involves social structure, involves bringing up a family, involves having children and raising them correctly, and also involves forwarding policies that allow for individual exercise on behalf of those sorts of virtues. Because I think that the exercise of free will, in the end, what God wants is for us to have free will and then use it well. And I think that what the left doesn't make room for is the idea of free will exercise, because they're afraid that they require compulsion in order to make people do the right thing. I think that the founders did not think that, but they did think that you needed strong social standards and social organizations in order to fill that gap. So that's why I say I think purpose can be derived from a couple of sources. In a vague sense, you can do the Aristotelian thing, where you can say what makes a good man, the same thing that makes a good watch, right? So what Aristotle says is good is not what you think is morally good. It means that for which you were made. Meaning that if you were, a watch is good because it works, right? Because it tells time. It's not good because it's morally good. It works because it tells time. So if you're a person, what you are made for is to reason and treat each other well, right? And so if you were made to reason, mostly, I mean, that's really what Aristotle focused on. If you were made to reason, then using your reason as opposed to following your feelings is what Aristotle sees your purpose as. I think that the Judeo-Christian moral vision is a lot more complex and a lot more fulfilling than just using your reason, because reason can lead you to a lot of terrible places. So, yeah, that's the short answer.
Hi, Ben. Big fan. My name is Jessica Anderson, and I go to Los Medanos College in the Bay Area. And I was privileged enough to go to your Say No to Campus Thuggery at Berkeley. And
well, thank you for braving the wilds.
Yeah, absolutely. So addressing that, how do we prevent that vast amount of intolerance on our own campuses?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that we have to prevent it. I think spotlighting it does a pretty good job for us. I think that one of the things that I've been really gratified by, something that YAF does, is, we've walked into the fire a lot of times now, working with YAF, and YAF's always stood by me in doing that. And I think that the exposure has done a lot of damage to the left movement on campus. I mean, do you think that the New York Times wants to write nice pieces about me? The fact is that every time I go on a campus and the left demonstrates that it's not just them trying to protest outside an event by Richard Spencer, it's a mainstream conservative, and they're trying to get violent in order to shut down a mainstream conservative from saying things like men are men and women are women, that the vast majority of the American public looks at that and goes, these people are crazy. And so, showing people for what they are, I think, is the best solution to this. I think most people look at the video of Berkeley and they see people outside chanting speech is violence, and they say, well, these people are crazy. And I think that's very good for our side, and I think it minimizes their draw. I think people see them as kooks even on the mainstream left. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. Thank you so much.